They said their love was a crime. What happened next became Savannah's darkest secret. This isn't a ghost story. It's a true story of defiance, forbidden love, and disappearance that changed Georgia's history forever. Welcome to one of the most haunting and mysterious stories ever to come out of Savannah, Georgia. The year was 1839, a time when Savannah still shimmered as the crown jewel of the South. Its streets were lined with ancient oaks draped in heavy Spanish moss, their long shadows crawling across the cobblestone paths at dusk. The humid air carried whispers that drifted from the grand mansions of Abercorn Street to the quiet slave quarters hidden just behind them. It all began with something so small, most would have missed it entirely. A short notice printed in the Savannah Morning Republican on April 3, 1839. A marriage license had been issued to Mrs. Elizabeth Thornton, a widow of 42, and a man named James Bennett, only 26. Nothing unusual at first glance, until one learned that James Bennett had, until recently, been regarded not as a free man, but as property on the Thornton plantation. The scandal that followed would shake not just the Thornton family, but Savannah's entire polite society, forcing long-buried secrets into the light. Elizabeth Thornton, born Elizabeth Montgomery, came from one of Georgia's oldest and most powerful families. Her grandfather had arrived with General Oglethorpe himself in 1733, one of the first settlers of the colony. Over the generations, the Montgomery family became wealthy through their rice plantations along the Savannah River, fortunes built upon the labor of hundreds of enslaved men and women. Elizabeth grew up surrounded by luxury inside her family's grand three-story mansion on Reynolds Square. Church records from Christchurch Episcopal show she married young, just 17, to Richard Thornton, a widower 28 years her senior and owner of a vast cotton plantation outside the city. Their marriage united two of Georgia's richest bloodlines. Richard's first wife had died in childbirth, leaving behind a young son named William, only 5 years younger than his new stepmother. A family cousin, Mary Benny, visited the Thornton plantation in the summer of 1826 and wrote in her journal that the house was managed with quiet precision. She described Elizabeth as gentle in appearance, but firm in her command, maintaining strict order among the servants. Richard, she noted, was distant and spoke rarely at meals. Whenever he did, an uneasy silence often followed. Richard's frequent business trips to Charleston and Augusta left Elizabeth in charge of the estate most of the time. Few outside the household noticed how much time she spent with one of the servants, a woman named Grace. Household records show Grace was purchased in 1822 from a trader in Charleston, arriving with her 9-year-old son, James. By 1835, tax ledgers from Chatham County listed 47 enslaved individuals on the Thornton estate. Among them, James Bennett appeared as one of only 4 house servants. Most of the others toiled in the fields, their names reduced to numbers in inventory books. Yet James's name appeared repeatedly, first as Grace's boy, then as simply James, and eventually as James Bennett. The use of a surname for someone enslaved was rare, and historians have puzzled over it for decades. Dr. Eleanor Hammond, a historian who examined the Thornton papers in 1963, before those same papers mysteriously vanished from the Georgia Historical Society archives, wrote in her manuscript Whispers from Reynolds Square that James was taught to read and write, something almost unheard of in his position. Ledgers recorded purchases of books, writing slates, and pencils for J.B.'s instruction. When Richard Thornton died during the yellow fever outbreak of 1836, his will left the estate to Elizabeth and a substantial inheritance to his son, William. But one clause stood out. "The servant James Bennett shall remain in the employ of my wife and shall not be sold or transferred under any circumstances." Years later, that single sentence would become the center of legal and moral debate. Elizabeth observed a full year of mourning as expected. To outsiders, the plantation continued to operate smoothly. But people began to notice odd changes. A neighbor, Margaret Habersham, later told investigators she saw Elizabeth and James walking through the garden as equals, not as mistress and servant. A kitchen maid, Sarah Johnson, once entered the study without knocking and found them standing close together, James's hand quickly dropping from Elizabeth's arm as they turned, startled. "They looked like they'd been burned," she recalled. "Mrs. Thornton sent me away, but her face was red like I'd never seen." As months passed, Elizabeth withdrew from Savannah society. Her cousin Thomas Montgomery visited her in early 1838 and wrote that she seemed different, distracted yet oddly radiant, and dressed far more simply than before. He mentioned that James served tea during his visit, and that Elizabeth spoke to him with a familiarity that made him deeply uneasy. "She said she had never felt more alive," he wrote. "There was a light in her eyes I did not recognize, a kind of secret joy." By December of 1838, a series of letters began circulating between William Thornton and his uncle, Judge Henry Thornton. William reported disturbing rumors about his stepmother's behavior and announced his plan to visit the plantation without warning. The judge urged discretion, warning that whispers in certain circles had already begun. William arrived at the plantation on January 15, 1839, during a cold, steady rain. By the next morning, something terrible had occurred. Reports described a disturbance of serious nature. No full record survives, but what's known is that William went directly to the sheriff's office before sunrise. By noon, James Bennet had been arrested on unspecified charges that were later quietly dismissed. Elizabeth herself was never arrested, though church elders advised her to withdraw from public worship for a period of reflection. 6 weeks later, silence turned to shock. The Savannah Morning Republican printed another notice: the marriage of Mrs. Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennet. Somehow, Elizabeth had obtained freedom papers for James, and in an open act of defiance, married him in a private ceremony officiated by Reverend John Baker, a Methodist minister known for his abolitionist beliefs. The ceremony took place not in a church but inside the Thornton home, witnessed only by Grace, James's mother, and a visiting lawyer from Philadelphia named Samuel Cooper. The backlash was immediate and vicious. The Savannah City Council convened an emergency session on April 5, 1839, to address what they described as a moral threat to the foundation of our society. William Thornton petitioned the court to have his stepmother declared mentally unfit and sought to seize her property. The Montgomery family publicly disowned Elizabeth, publishing notices across Georgia and South Carolina stating that she was no longer recognized as kin. Much of what followed was deliberately erased. Many records were destroyed, perhaps to conceal shame, but fragments of the truth survived, in old letters, hidden journals, and whispered recollections. One such letter, found in 1954 during renovations of a home on Broughton Street, described what happened next. The anonymous writer, calling himself a witness to infamy, recounted how 12 men rode to the Thornton plantation on the night of April 10th, torches in hand, demanding that James Bennet come out to face justice. But instead, it was Elizabeth who appeared on the porch holding a shotgun. "This is my home and my choice," she told them. "Leave now, or face what comes." Her words, and the unshakable calm in her eyes, made even the angriest men hesitate. The mob retreated that night, only to return 2 days later with the sheriff. This time, they found the house abandoned. The furniture was covered neatly with sheets, as if everything had been carefully packed rather than hastily left behind. In the small study that once belonged to James, not a single trace remained. No papers, no books, nothing. Sarah Johnson later told interviewers that Elizabeth had taught James to read in that very room and that they had spent countless evenings there together. "They cleared it out completely," she said, "not a thing left to show what had been." The disappearance of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennett became known as the Great Savannah Mystery. Rewards were offered, and search parties spread across Georgia. Some believed the couple had fled north with help from abolitionists. Others claimed they were lost at sea or still haunted the ruins of the plantation. No evidence was ever found. Newspapers described it as the largest manhunt in Chatham County's history. Ports were monitored, roads were watched, and even neighboring states were alerted. Private detectives came from as far as New York, yet no verified sighting was ever made. It was as if they had vanished into the warm Georgia air. Still, rumors persisted. A train station clerk in Charleston swore he saw a white woman and a well-dressed black man boarding a northbound train. A ship captain in Delaware later claimed to have transported a mixed couple to Boston that same month. Years later, a banker in Montreal said a woman resembling Elizabeth had tried to withdraw funds using papers signed by Samuel Cooper. As years passed, the scandal softened into a ghost story, a whispered warning told to young women from respectable families. William Thornton eventually took control of the estate in October 1839, sold it to a Virginia family, and never returned. The fate of the 46 enslaved people left behind remains unclear, though records show that many were sold to plantations in Alabama. Grace, James's mother, was never listed among them. The mystery might have ended there, if not for what was discovered 5 years later. In 1844, while the house was being repaired for new owners, workers found a small leather-bound journal hidden under the study floorboards, wrapped in oilcloth. It was handed to local officials who passed it to Judge Henry Thornton. He reportedly read it in one sitting, then locked it in his safe. 3 weeks later, he died suddenly. His doctor called it apoplexy, a stroke brought on by severe shock. His widow later admitted to burning the journal, calling it a dangerous book that carried corruption. Yet, before its destruction, the judge's clerk, Thomas Wilberforce, secretly copied several passages. Years later, he moved to Boston, joined abolitionist circles, and shared those notes with a Harvard scholar in 1861. When those notes resurfaced in Harvard's archives nearly a century later, they revealed that the journal had belonged to Elizabeth Thornton herself. Her earliest entries from 1822 described her fascination with young James. "The boy shows great intelligence. There is something in his eyes, a brightness, a quick mind that I have not seen before." Later pages chronicled how she defied her husband's rules by teaching James to read. "R would be furious if he knew," she wrote, "but what harm can knowledge bring? The boy learns faster than anyone I've known." As years went by, her tone changed. "He is 17 now," she wrote in 1830. "I watch him from my window as he works in the garden. I tell myself it is pride, but perhaps it is something deeper, something I dare not name." By 1835, her words had turned into confession. "We read Byron together. He recited verses, and I saw not the boy I once taught, but the man he has become." The last entry, dated March 30th, 1839, read, "Tomorrow everything changes. Sam Cooper has the papers. Once the ceremony is done, we must leave at once. Jay fears for his mother, but she insists on staying until it is safe. I have sewn what jewelry I could into our clothing. I know the danger, but for once, I choose my own path." According to Harvard's researcher, Wilberforce later told friends he met a woman in Montreal in 1852 who reminded him of Elizabeth. She lived quietly among families of mixed heritage. When he approached her, she denied her identity but invited him to tea. She spoke fondly of poetry, especially Byron. On her wall hung a portrait of a dark-skinned man in formal dress. "My late husband," she told him, "he passed 3 years ago." Wilberforce never spoke publicly of the encounter. Over time, the Thornton affair faded into legend, swallowed by the coming storm of war. The plantation changed hands twice before being destroyed during Sherman's march in 1864. Today, quiet suburban houses stand on that same land, their residents unaware that beneath their feet lies one of Savannah's most forbidden love stories, a story that refused to die no matter how hard history tried to bury it. The Thornton name now survives only on a quiet side street near Abercorn and within the archives of the Georgia Historical Society, where curious researchers occasionally stumble upon fragments of its story by chance. In 1957, while workers were building a shopping center near the old plantation grounds, they uncovered a small metal box buried about 3 feet below the surface. Inside were a cameo brooch, a pressed camellia sealed between glass, and a folded note tied with a lock of hair. These items were sent to the Georgia Historical Society, where they remained forgotten and unrecorded until 1963. That year, Dr. Ellen Hammond examined them while researching the Thornton mystery. She noted that the cameo perfectly matched one described in Elizabeth Thornton's wedding inventory. The pressed flower was a rare camellia variety, cultivated only on the Thornton plantation, and the lock of hair appeared to come from 2 different people, carefully intertwined. Dr. Hammond never published her findings. Her colleagues said she became increasingly obsessed, convinced that more evidence was hidden somewhere. In the spring of 1963, she traveled to Montreal to follow up on the Wilberforce connection. In a letter to her department chair, she wrote that she had made an important discovery and would return with proof that could change Georgia's history. 2 weeks later, her hotel room was found empty. Her notes were missing, and the only thing left behind was a single pressed camellia placed on her pillow. 3 days after that, she was found in a hospital, disoriented and unable to recall what had happened or where her research had gone. After this incident, she abandoned the Thornton case entirely and refused to speak of it again until her death in 1968. Today, the story of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennett exists somewhere between verifiable history and whispered legend. Some parts can be confirmed through court records, newspapers, and personal letters. Others remain uncertain, made up of fragments, rumors, and silent gaps in the historical record. What is beyond doubt is that in the spring of 1839, a wealthy white widow and a black man she once legally owned under Georgia law vanished together. Their disappearance shocked society, not only because it defied racial boundaries, but because it seemed their closeness had developed over years, possibly even while Elizabeth's husband was still alive, within a home that symbolized Southern order itself. The real mystery is not only what became of them after they disappeared, but what unfolded before. What happened in those quiet hours of teaching and learning, in their conversations over books, or in the fleeting glances exchanged across rooms where others saw only a mistress and her servant. What words were spoken, what promises made, and most unsettling of all, how many other homes concealed similar stories behind walls that appeared calm and proper? How many other lives crossed the forbidden lines society fought so hard to maintain? After Dr. Hammond's death, a graduate student sorting through her belongings discovered a sealed envelope containing a note that requested it not be opened until 50 years after her passing. The university administration, fearing possible legal complications, ignored her wish and opened the envelope in the presence of lawyers. A staff member who later spoke on condition of anonymity said the envelope held a single sheet of paper with an address in Montreal and the words, "They survived, they lived, their descendants walk among us still." The document was reportedly taken by university officials and never made public. According to that same witness, the address led to a cemetery. Even today, the story of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennett, occasionally surfaces in academic discussions, in specialized studies of antebellum Southern life, and in quiet retellings during ghost tours of Savannah's historic district. Tour guides often point to a house on Reynolds Square, not the original Thornton residence but one nearby, and claim that on certain nights, especially in April, a faint light drifts from room to room, as if someone is searching for something, or perhaps someone. Others say they've heard a soft voice reciting poetry, though the words remain unclear. These tales are, of course, embellished for visitors, yet the fascination persists. What remains undeniable is this. In 1839, Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennet chose each other in a world that forbade such a choice. Rather than live apart, they vanished. Somewhere, perhaps in a forgotten archive, an attic trunk, or beneath a modern building, there may still lie a clue to what became of them after they stepped out of the written record and into legend. Until new evidence emerges, their story remains one of Savannah's most haunting and thought-provoking chapters. Not because of ghosts or violence, but because it challenged the very foundation of the society they lived in. It revealed how fragile those social rules truly were, and how far people would go either to defend or to defy them. As one Harvard researcher who examined the Wilberforce papers once wrote, the most unsettling thing about the Thornton case is not what it reveals about the two individuals themselves, but what it suggests about the countless others whose stories never reached the page. Those whose courage went unseen, whose voices were silenced, whose lives were erased from memory. How many Elizabeth Thorntons and James Bennets lived and died across the American South, their struggles buried with them? And what does it say about a society that worked so hard to ensure such stories would never come to light? These questions still echo through Savannah's moss-draped squares, along the quiet riverbanks, and in the spaces between history's written lines. In 1972, during renovations of an old colonial post office in Schenectady, New York, workers found a hidden compartment behind a loose brick in the basement wall. Inside was a small leather pouch containing 3 letters addressed to Mrs. Jane Bennet at an Albany address. The letters, dated between 1841 and 1843, were written in a graceful hand and signed only with the initial G. Historians later identified the author as likely Grace, James Bennet's mother, who was thought to have remained in Georgia after Elizabeth and James fled. The letters made no direct mention of Savannah or the scandal, but they referred to a mutual friend who had moved north and longed for news from home. The most revealing line appeared in the final letter, dated December 18, 1843. Our mutual friend asks after you often. Things here have grown harder since your departure. The new master is cruel. Many have been sold away. I still keep the secret you entrusted to me, though there are those who question me. The item you left in my care is still safe where we agreed. When my time comes, I hope to join you in a place where people may live by their hearts rather than by the commands of others. These letters were significant not only for their content but for their very existence. They hinted that Grace may have escaped north after all, contradicting official records claiming she died on the Thornton plantation in 1840. More importantly, they suggested there had been a secret line of communication, a quiet network connecting Georgia to New York, allowing messages to pass despite every attempt to erase the bond between Elizabeth, James, and their former lives. Further evidence of this network emerged in 1959 when a historian studying the Underground Railroad uncovered account books belonging to Samuel Cooper, a Philadelphia lawyer who had witnessed the couple's marriage. Found in the archives of a Quaker meeting house, these ledgers contained coded entries later interpreted as financial records supporting escape routes for enslaved people. One entry, dated June 5, 1839, read, "Special arrangement for TNB package delivered safely to Montreal. Additional funds released as agreed for 5 years of protection and silence." Dr. Marcus Williams, who examined the Cooper records before they were sealed from public access in 1962, wrote privately, "The Cooper accounts indicate that the Thornton-Bennett escape was not an impulsive act of rebellion, but a carefully organized plan that may have taken years to prepare. The level of funding, enough to ensure 5 years of safety and secrecy, suggests not only substantial resources but extraordinary planning." One must ask, when did Elizabeth Thornton begin plotting her departure from Savannah society? Was it after her husband's death or long before? This question became even more compelling in 1964 when construction workers demolishing an old rice mill near the former Thornton estate found a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside was a small wooden chest containing what seemed to be teaching materials: a primer, a slate, several pencils, and a copy of Byron's collected poems. Experts dated these objects to the 1820s or early 1830s, before Richard Thornton's death. Most striking was a small notebook filled with handwriting exercises, the same sentence repeated over and over in improving penmanship. "I am James Bennett. I am a man. I have a mind." At the bottom of the page, written in a different hand believed to be Elizabeth's, were the words, "Excellent progress. You have earned your name today." The discovery suggested that Elizabeth had secretly taught James to read and write while her husband was still alive. Records show that the rice mill had fallen into disuse after 1825, making it an ideal place for clandestine lessons, far enough from the main house to avoid suspicion, yet not so distant as to raise questions about her absences. What no one has ever determined is when their relationship shifted from teacher and student to something deeper. No documents directly confirm such a bond before Richard Thornton's death. Still, a letter Elizabeth wrote to her cousin Anne Montgomery on October 18, 1834, 2 years before she became a widow, contains a passage many scholars believe hints at it. "I live 2 lives now, one that the world sees, where I play my part as expected, and another made of moments stolen from the day. Conversations that must never be overheard, thoughts I dare not speak. It is in that hidden life that I feel most truly alive. Is it not strange to feel most real when one must hide the most?" The double life she described became increasingly difficult to maintain after her husband's death. As a widow, Elizabeth faced constant scrutiny, especially in how she managed the plantation and those she now owned outright. Several accounts noted a change in her demeanor. Margaret Williams, a neighbor who kept a private diary discovered in 1957, wrote in September 1836, "Visited Elizabeth Thornton 6 months after her husband's death. She seems different, in a way I cannot quite explain. There is a restless energy about her that doesn't fit her mourning dress. When I mentioned how hard it must be to manage such a large estate alone, she smiled strangely and said, 'I am not as alone as you might think.' I left feeling uneasy, as though I had glimpsed something not meant to be seen." As more people noticed her unusual behavior, James Bennett's role in the household also began to shift. Witnesses later recalled that by early 1838, James had assumed responsibilities far beyond what was typical for a man in his position. The kitchen maid, Sarah Johnson, told investigators that he was managing the plantation's accounts, meeting visitors when Elizabeth was away, and even writing letters to merchants in Savannah on behalf of the estate. "He sat at the master's desk," she said, "used the master's pen, spoke with the master's confidence, and Mrs. Elizabeth, she only smiled as if she knew exactly what she was doing. It seemed the most natural thing in the world." This slow change in roles, this gentle blurring of the rigid social boundaries of the South, could not continue without consequence. The turning point, as already known, came with William Thornton's unexpected visit in January 1839. What exactly he witnessed is still uncertain, but in a letter he sent to Judge Henry Thornton immediately after fleeing the estate, he described what he saw as a disturbance of natural order so deep that I could not remain under that roof another hour, lest I lose command of myself. He said he had found Elizabeth and James in a situation that left no space for any innocent excuse, though he avoided giving clear details out of respect for the Thornton family name. What happened right after William's discovery set in motion a chain of events that would eventually end with Elizabeth and James's marriage and their later disappearance. What few people ever realized was that during the 3 months between that visit and their wedding, Elizabeth quietly began selling her property and moving her wealth. Records from the Bank of Savannah show that between January 20th and March 15th, 1839, she withdrew large sums of money, converting them into portable forms such as banknotes and letters of credit. She also sold several valuable pieces of jewelry through a broker in Charleston, proven by a receipt found among Samuel Cooper's old papers. Most curious of all, she transferred ownership of a small property she had inherited in Philadelphia to a company with Cooper listed as its only trustee. These actions clearly show that Elizabeth was preparing not just to escape, but to begin a new life somewhere far beyond Georgia. The careful legal steps she took through other people and across state lines suggest that she fully understood the risks ahead. She and James needed more than just a way out. They needed new identities, a place where their pasts could not follow, where they could live freely without fear of discovery or rejection. The strongest proof of these plans appears in a statement from 1841 by a former clerk at a Savannah print shop. During a court hearing about William Thornton's claim to his stepmother's estate, the clerk testified that in February 1839, a well-dressed black man, later identified as James Bennett, had ordered a set of business cards and stationery for a Mr. James Bennett, importer of fine teas and spices, listing an address in Montreal. Bennett had told the clerk that he was arranging this on behalf of his employer, who was expanding trade in the North. The clerk thought little of it at the time, but later realized what it truly meant when the scandal became known. Those business cards were more than just a disguise. They represented the life Elizabeth and James had dreamed of together, a life where he would not be a servant, but a businessman, not property, but a respected trader. Choosing Montreal was a clever decision. As part of British Canada, it stood safely outside the reach of American laws regarding runaway slaves. Its mixed population offered a kind of protection, and as a major trading hub, the idea of a tea and spice importer there seemed perfectly reasonable. The exact details of their journey from Savannah to Montreal remain largely unknown, though scattered hints suggest they first traveled by ship to Philadelphia. There, Cooper is believed to have sheltered them briefly and helped them obtain new identity papers. From there, they likely continued north through New York and crossed into Canada. Among Cooper's belongings, a receipt was found for passage on the schooner Mary Jane, sailing from Savannah to Philadelphia on April 12, 1839. It listed 2 passengers, Mrs. E. Smith and Mr. J. Smith, described as an aunt and nephew traveling on family business. What seems certain is that by August of that same year, someone fitting Elizabeth's description attempted to access funds in Montreal. Later that year, city directories listed a James Bennett importer with a small shop on Rue St. Paul and a residence on Rue Antoine. The following year added a Mrs. Jane Bennett at the same address. No mention was made of their race or background. Life in Montreal would have brought its own challenges. Though they were free from the danger of Southern law, they had to construct believable new identities. Elizabeth's accent, their mannerisms, and their behavior all needed to match the story they presented. Their success in business depended not only on their work, but on how convincingly they could live as the people they claimed to be. From what records survive, it seems they managed quite well. Port of Montreal documents show that Bennett's tea and spice business remained active throughout the 1840s. Tax records show gradual growth, and by 1845 they had moved to a larger shop. Church records from a small Methodist congregation mention regular attendance and donations from Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, described as a couple of mixed background, worded vaguely enough to avoid questions. The most intimate glimpse into their Montreal life comes from the diary of a young woman named Marie Leblanc, who worked in their shop from 1843 to 1845. Found in 1966, her journal includes warm notes about her employers. Madame Bennett speaks French with an American accent, she wrote, but tries earnestly to improve. She is always graceful, even in plain clothing, and treats everyone kindly, from wealthy customers to the poorest vendors. Mr. Bennett manages the shop with care, and they seem quietly devoted to each other. They share small glances when they think no one notices, signs of affection that make me hope for the same someday. In another entry, Marie recalled, "A customer from Boston asked Mr. Bennett about his past. He said he had grown up in the South but preferred the air of Canada, both its climate and its society. The man then asked if Madame Bennett was of European descent. A silence filled the shop. Mr. Bennett smiled and replied, 'My wife and I have found Montreal asks fewer questions, which is exactly why we chose it.' The man soon left, but Madame Bennett's hands trembled as she arranged the tea canisters, though she pretended nothing was wrong. This moment showed how delicate their safety was. Even in their new home, one curious stranger from the South could have destroyed everything. That constant fear may have led them to sell their business in 1849 and move to a quieter village outside Montreal. Their old shop was bought by a French-Canadian merchant, and their home address vanished from city records. After that, the traces grow faint. There is no confirmed record of James Bennett's reported death from pneumonia around 1849, though Thomas Wilberforce later mentioned it after meeting Elizabeth. Death records from that time are unreliable, especially outside major cities. What can be verified is that in 1852, a year Wilberforce said he met her, a Mrs. Jane Bennett, widow, purchased a small home in St. Henry, then a separate town west of Montreal. The property remained in her name until 1867, when it passed to a Miss Grace Bennett, listed as her niece and only heir. Grace's appearance raises questions. No documents mention Elizabeth and James ever having a child, but the name Grace was that of James's mother. Could she have been James's mother who somehow found her way north, or perhaps a daughter born to the couple and named after her grandmother? The second explanation seems more likely, supported by a church record from 1860 confirming the baptism of Grace Bennett, age 14, placing her birth around 1846, 7 years after the escape from Savannah. If true, their story was not only one of forbidden love, but of a family created in defiance of the racial and social boundaries of 19th century America. Somewhere, there may still be descendants of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennett, unaware of the courage and hope that shaped their family's beginnings. The last known mention of Elizabeth appears in 1869, 30 years after her scandal first shook Savannah. A notice in a Montreal newspaper announced the death of Mrs. Jane Bennett, formerly of the United States, aged 72. The brief obituary said she was survived by her beloved granddaughter and remembered for her quiet strength, love of poetry, and belief that all souls are equal before God. She was buried in a small cemetery in St. Henri, in a grave she had purchased years earlier. Beside it lay another grave, unmarked except for the dates, 1822, 1849, the likely span of James Bennett's life. In 1963, when Dr. Eleanor Hammond traveled to Montreal following Wilberforce's notes, she reportedly visited that same cemetery. Whatever she discovered disappeared with her research papers during her mysterious 3-day absence. By 1970, The cemetery was relocated for city expansion, and the graves were moved without individual markers, erasing the final physical trace of their lives. All that remains today are fragments, records scattered across archives in Georgia, New York, Pennsylvania, and Quebec. Testimonies whispered long after the events, objects found beneath floors or behind walls, lines in diaries and letters never meant for others to read. From these pieces, we can outline something remarkable, a quiet rebellion against the rigid barriers of race and class. What remains unclear is not what Elizabeth and James did, but who they truly were to each other. When did teacher and pupil become equals? When did respect turn into love? What promises did they make in secret? What gave them the strength to imagine a life everyone said was impossible? These unanswered questions linger between the surviving records, echoing through Savannah's history and disturbing its polished image of the Old South. The story of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennet has no tidy ending and no easy moral. It reminds us of the many hidden stories buried beneath official histories, the quiet acts of defiance, the secret bonds, the human hearts that refuse to stay within society's lines. As one Harvard researcher later wrote, "What makes the Thornton affair so haunting is not merely that it happened, but that it forces us to wonder how many others did too. If a woman of Elizabeth's standing could risk everything for such a love, how many others felt the same but lacked her courage or means?" The true history of connection across the divisions of class and color in America remains mostly unwritten, existing only in fragments, whispers, and silence. In 1969, the same year Dr. Hammond's sealed envelope was opened, an elderly woman visited the Georgia Historical Society asking for any materials on the Thornton plantation. The archivist described her as well-dressed, around 70, with light brown skin and gray eyes. She spent hours reading, taking careful notes. When asked about her interest, she said she was tracing her family roots. As she left, she paused at the display case holding the cameo brooch and pressed flower found in 1957. She stood quietly for a long time, then smiled, not sadly, but as though recalling a distant memory. She touched the glass and said softly, "Some stories are better left untold, but that doesn't make them any less true." She never returned, and her name was never recorded. Like so much of this story, she remains another fragment, another echo from a past that refuses to disappear. In the end, this may be what gives the Thornton Bennet story its lasting power: the endurance of human connection and the refusal of love, in any form, to obey society's rules. In a world that declared their bond impossible, Elizabeth and James carved out a small place for themselves, first in secrecy, then in exile, and finally in memory. Even now, the traces they left can still move us. In Savannah, on certain April nights when the air is thick with jasmine and history, guides still point toward Reynolds Square and quietly tell the tale of the widow who defied her world. Some claim to see lights flicker in old windows, hear faint poetry whispered, or feel a chill drift through the warm air. They are just stories meant to charm tourists seeking a hint of mystery. But beneath them lies a deeper truth. The past is never as simple as we wish it were, and human hearts have always refused to be contained.